Hey everyone, how are you today? So today we're going to be moving into the actual beginning of World War II. We've kind of spent the past 2 weeks focusing on what was happening in each of the major countries between World War I and World War II, and who are these leaders? How did these dictators come to power? And then ultimately, once Hitler was in power, how did he, create this, attempted genocide where he was killing millions and millions of Jews and other people who did not fit into his ideal of what should be the proper Aryan race. So we're moving kind of backwards now into section 2 of chapter 13. We're going to be looking at that this week as we talk about the major battles really between 1939 and 1941 in Europe and a couple of them in Africa. And then we'll get into the end of chapter 13 this week as well. The last section of chapter 13 is really just about how America is neutral and how the U.S. finally enters the war because of the attack on Pearl Harbor. So we'll be getting into the attack on Pearl Harbor this week. You've got some big assignments coming up this week since you're going to be having a quiz this week over sections 1 and 3 over the rise of leaders, the dictators, and the Holocaust. And then this week, we're also going to be moving into our next writing assignment on Pearl Harbor. So you're going to be reading some primary and secondary sources, doing some scaffolding questions, writing a thesis statement, and then working towards writing your rough draft. We're not going to be writing the full 5-paragraph essay yet, but we're going to be writing 3 paragraphs this time. So the introduction paragraph and the first 2 body paragraphs. And that's not going to be due until the Tuesday after spring break. So that would be April 6th. So here we go, let's move on. So what we're going to get into today is pretty much just focusing on, what Hitler does to really begin the war. We've talked about how he's come to power at this point and, his, attempt to dehumanize the Jews in terms of the different stages of the Holocaust. Today we're going to really start to get into the battles. There's going to be a battle worksheet that we're going to be working on as well here. And if you look in today's lecture, you can use today's lecture notes to complete part of that battle sheet. So we're going to be completing it kind of as notes, as an assignment. It's not due till the end of the chapter. We're going to be doing some book work this week as well as we look at some political cartoons and answer some essential questions as well. But that won't be due for a couple weeks yet either. So let's talk about 1936. So remember we said that in 1935, Hitler officially came to power after Hindenburg had died. He, before that, had even passed an enabling act to give himself full power and control of the Reichstag. And so he had slowly started to enact more policies to give him control in the government, to create the Gestapo, his secret police, to create his SA, his stormtroopers, and his SS, and which were more like his bodyguards, but also kind of his villains. And he passes the Nuremberg laws during this time period. He starts attacking Jews. Kristallnacht will happen here in 1937 into 1938. And also while he's kind of cementing his power in Germany, creating this police state, putting up propaganda through the help of Joseph Goebbels, and trying to make everybody love him, going on loudspeakers, creating jobs, improving the economy, hosting the Olympics to put on the show for the rest of the world to show how great Germans are and superior. He is also, of course, planning to take over the world, because remember, he talked about that. So Hitler basically starts to really get on the move here in the 1930s and starts to create his Third Reich. Remember, he laid out his plans for global domination in Mein Kampf, where he said that he was going to kill all the Jews, and it was in the Germans' destiny to move eastward. They needed Lebensraum or living space. They were going to take over Russia. But really and truly, before he does that, he plans to conquer most of the countries in Europe. And he's an incredibly intelligent man. He looks at World War I and he sees where Germany failed. Germany failed because they divided their armies in two, and they were fighting this two-front war against Russia and against France and the British. And so he figures, pretend that Russia is his ally, and Russia and him are going to take over Europe together. In reality, he's going to take over most of Europe, and then he's going to turn on Russia and stab him in the back. Now, Hitler starts to slowly take over land. He doesn't just come out guns blazing because he wants to train his troops. He wants to get experience. He's creating new types of technology. He's trying to get his country geared up for war and having them believe in it. And he wants to make sure that the U.S. does not attack. He's trying to not set the U.S. off. And the U.S. is pretty, focused on its own needs. It's focused on isolationism. It's going through the Great Depression, but still, he wants to ease into things. There is the League of Nations, which is that international peacekeeping group Germany as part of it. And he doesn't want to tick them off. He wants to kind of slowly show them that he's not that scary. So they just kind of let him do what he wants. Plus, he's not entirely threatened by them or the Kellogg-Briand Pact, where countries had said they were against peace, um, or any of these international courts that have been created after the Treaty of Versailles, because he looks at Hideki Tojo and he's like, well, he took over Manchuria, no consequences. Um, and of course, Mussolini takes over Ethiopia, no consequences. So he figures, I'm going to start taking over land. So the Germans end up reoccupying the land called the Rhineland. And this is a border area that borders France and Germany. This is the land that historically had been owned by the French. Then the Germans took it back, then the French took it back, then the Germans took it back. It's gone back and forth over the years. It's full of coal and natural resources. Some French people live there, many German people live there. He wants it back. So he sends in his troops. And it's a very peaceful kind of transition. Many people wanted to become part of Germany anyway, and some people did not because they were afraid of Hitler and his power. But the Allies just let him get away with it because they are following this policy of appeasement, which we talked about before. And that's what's happening with Japan, and that's what's happening with Italy. They figure we're just going to let him get what he wants, and then he'll be happy, and then he won't take anything else. But we've talked about this before. If a little kid is throwing a fit and refusing to eat dinner, and all they want for dinner is ice cream, and you give in to their demands once they stomp their feet and kick and scream and yell, you have positively reinforced their behavior. You've shown them that if they throw a fit, they can get their way. So the fact that Hitler faces no consequences for what he does makes him assume that he can keep taking more land. And unfortunately, it opens up Belgium and France to an attack because he's even closer to them. Now, France is very wary. They don't want to go to war, but they're very wary. They don't trust Germany. In fact, they've built up this entire border between France and Germany called the Maginot Line, where there are ditches between the two countries, so that if they have to fight another war, they'll basically be prepared with a much better ditch than World War I. They think the next war will still be trench warfare style. And Britain, on the other hand, tells the French to calm down, says everything's going to be fine. We can't fight another war. That was the war to end all wars. It was the Great War. We're just going to have to deal with it. Well, things start to heat up in 1936, a little further west in Spain. In Spain, there's a man by the name of Francisco Franco, and he is a nationalist. He is what we could refer to as a fascist. Remember, fascism is where you put the needs of the country above your own. He looks at Mussolini. He looks at Hitler, two fascist dictators who come to power and created a police state in their country, and then taken control of the legislature and improved the economy and gotten their nations out of the Great Depression, and he wants to do the same. Spain is a country that for years has been struggling economically, and it's never really gone through the Industrial Revolution. The Great Depression only made things worse. Up until 1931, they were ruled by a monarchy, and now they're finally a democracy. People overthrew those old-fashioned leaders, hoping for a new government and better economic policies, but that hasn't happened yet. Many people in Spain want to have a Republican-style government where you elect your leaders where it's a democracy. Some people, though, support the old-fashioned militaristic ideas of Franco and of putting the needs of the state above your own, and even the sexist gender roles. They'll do whatever it takes to get food on the table, and they say we've never really been a democracy. It's okay if we hold off being one longer. Now, the Spanish Civil War is important because it's basically a dress rehearsal for World War I or World War II. It's a trial run. Hitler and Mussolini get involved to help another fascist supporter, someone who really sucks up to them and praises them. But now Hitler can try his new submarines, his new planes, his new machine guns that he's been creating, his new Panzer tanks. He can try out all these new technology that he's been developing to try to be ready for World War II and to show his men what it's like to actually fight in battle so that they are prepared for a war. And that's really and truly why Hitler and Mussolini get involved in this. And of course, with all the money and the soldiers and the technology provided by Hitler and Mussolini, Franco easily wins. The Soviet Union did get involved for a short time and tried to give some money and supplies and a few soldiers to the Spanish government, simply because they saw what was happening and they didn't really support democracy. I mean, Russia is a dictatorship led by Stalin and it's communist. They'd like to see another communist country be created. They didn't really support Spain's way of doing things, but they were more so wary of Hitler's interest in this war, seeing that it wouldn't serve anyone if Hitler was able to perhaps get another ally or convince more people to be fascist or under his thumb, so to speak. But unfortunately, this country does become a fascist dictatorship, and it's really important because it's just getting his troops practiced and ready to fight. And more countries are nervous about war, but they still are convincing themselves that World War II can't possibly happen. The US and many other countries stay neutral. They say it's not our job to get involved, in a civil war. It has nothing to do with us. And so America this whole time is neutral, more so than ever before. In the late 1930s, we're all about putting America first. Remember, FDR's second term in office is a bit of disaster. He's going through that court packing plan where he was trying to stuff the Supreme Court with more judges, since the Supreme Court was ruling many of the New Deal laws unconstitutional, and he was worried about the fate of the Fair Labor Standards Act, minimum wage, and Social Security, and whether that would be ruled constitutional. They didn't rule it unconstitutional. He didn't add more judges, but it really kind of was a shadow over his presidency. And then there was the whole problem with the economic recession. So during this whole time period, things are rough, in the United States, and we're definitely focused on isolationism, putting America first. We don't want to get involved. There's even this crazy congressional committee called the Nye Committee, where they've convinced themselves that the U.S. was tricked into World War I, and it was only about gun manufacturers wanting to get involved so they could make huge profits off the war. That was a lot of the socialist propaganda that had been put out originally, but now people are even buying into it. So in 1935, the president, really even before he started his second term, officially says that we are going to remain neutral. And originally, we banned the sale of weapons to other countries who are at war. We refused to give them loans. Later, we revised that policy to cash and carry. So as Spain is in its civil war, we say, look, we will give you a loan, but we will sell you wartime supplies, but you have to come and pick it up yourself. We're not risking American lives or merchant ships or anything else like in World War I. And this cash and carry policy will be our early policy once World War II begins towards our former allies of Britain and France. Now, Hitler really starts to get on the move to gain more land in 1938. In 1938, he decides that he wants to finally have his Anschluss occur. And Anschluss basically means union, where he wants to take Austria and he wants to unite it with Germany. He says it's high time that he adds this land to his empire, that Austria is his home country, that Austrians want to be part of Germany. It's only natural. And so he quote unquote invades because he shows up with military force. But as you can see in the pictures, people are happy to see him. They're greeting him. They take down the Austrian flag. They put up the German flag, and he easily adds this territory, as you can see in the map there, to his empire, help working towards creating his Third Reich, his Third Great German Empire. And France and Britain continue to do nothing, believing in this policy of appeasement that once he, gains back the land that Germany lost in World War II, he'll stop. Or at least that's what they tell themselves to sleep at night. And you can kind of see in this map here, Germany, as it's really kind of been increasing, and they've added, Austria to that German Empire at this point. Well, now Hitler wants that area there in yellow, kind of that goldish mustard yellow, called the Sudetenland. A lot of Germans live there, 3 million of them, in fact, and he says that that territory was historically part of Germany as well prior to the last war, and he wants it back. The people who live in Czechoslovakia don't want to give up that land. They say, no, this is a new country that was created after World War I in the Treaty of Versailles. We all are of the same background. Some of those people living in there may be German, but the rest of us are Slovak. We don't want to be divided, and he just wants this land for resources, and he needs to be stopped. So Czechoslovakia refuses Hitler, and they ask for help. They appeal to Britain and France, and they say, what are you going to do about this? This man is violating the Treaty of Versailles. He's violating the League of Nations. He's violating the Kellogg-Brown Pact. No one is stopping him, and we don't have the military to do so. Help us. So in September 29th of 1938, war almost began at the Munich conference. And the man you see on the left, that's Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister. And he meets with Adolf Hitler, and the two talk. And Hitler says, look, I really want the Sudetenland. I think I deserve it. And if you give this to me, I promise I'll never, ever take any more land. He somehow cons Chamberlain into this. Either Chamberlain is stupid, a fool, and just buys it, or he's terrified of Hitler and figures this will avoid war, or he's just fooling himself into thinking that war isn't coming anyway. It's unclear. But he makes the deal, goes on the radio to the British people, says war has been avoided, I've declared peace in our time, and some people celebrate him as a hero, but many other people are skeptical of Neville Chamberlain, saying, this Munich conference was a joke. He's still going to take more of Czechoslovakia. He's still going to attack the world. We need to start preparing ourselves. And there was a real debate going on in these countries about whether they should mobilize for war or not at this point. Some wanted to, many did not. Now, this man, Winston Churchill, was Neville Chamberlain's political rival. And he said, I think you're an idiot. He says Britain and France had to choose between war and shame. They chose shame. They will get war too. So he basically says Neville Chamberlain has shamed us. He's made us look like fools. Hitler's still going to attack. We need to do something about it. And he says this policy of appeasement, where we're just letting them get whatever they want to avoid war, is playing right into their hand, and it's just going to lead us to war anyway. We need to strike. We need to stop them. We need to prepare our troops, but unfortunately, he's not the prime minister yet, and no one listens to him. Now, as time goes on, about 6 months later, after the Munich conference, Hitler takes over the rest of Czechoslovakia, which really was no surprise to Churchill or to many others, and it got people in Britain very nervous. It got people in France very nervous, and many people in America started saying war is coming. It's about at this point that SS St. Louis ship shows up in the U.S. and FDR sends the ship away. He really wanted to let those 930 Jews come to America, but he was refusing them because Congress did not want to get involved. Congress was afraid that if we opened up our policy of immigration and we let Jews and all these people who were refugees come to America, it would drag us into World War II. It would make Hitler angry, and they wanted to remain neutral. And FDR realized war was coming. And he's already thinking about the long game of how we can help our allies, thinking eventually we're going to get in the war, despite the fact that he was telling the people that he plans to keep America out of the war. But he does admit that he's going to keep us out as long as possible. And it's this kind of middle-of-the-road policy that gets us into World War II. So Hitler takes over all of Czechoslovakia, and then about during that time period, he also demands the city of Danzig in Poland because it's a warm water port, and it would make it possible for him to keep boats in the water all the time. It would give him, sea access, basically, so he could be exporting and importing goods to basically feed his war machine. He's building up his navy at this time, which is difficult for Germany because they're more of a landlocked country, but they're building up this empire, and they're clearly going to need a navy to get supplies and to stop enemy attacks. He also wants to build a railroad across Poland so he can ship goods, because remember, this is all part of his plan to take over Russia. Well, Britain and France start to realize that war is inevitable. They tell the Polish they will help them. The Polish government starts building up their own army and mobilizing for war. Some countries start putting out propaganda to get people to support the war. They start training soldiers, but there's no draft yet. And even though there's calls for war and talk of it in the newspaper, many people still live in this bubble, convincing themselves that all will be well. And honestly, these countries are anything but prepared for war at this time. They don't have enough guns or troops or supplies. And just like anything else, it will take time to get ready for war. But Hitler, in the meantime, he will be ready because he is launching the attack. And you can kind of see how the German Empire has grown over time as we have the Anschluss to after the Munich Agreement when he got Sudetenland to all of Czechoslovakia, and now he wants that warm water port of Poland. Now, in the background here, remember what's going on is that France and Great Britain are looking to Russia for help, saying this is going to be a repeat of World War I. We crushed the Germans once. We can do it again, even without the Americans' help, as long as Russia stays in the war. And Russia is not interested. Russia felt betrayed. It was really ridiculous. They thought that they should have deserved money and land out of the Treaty of Versailles, even though they left the war early and signed their own Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and became that communist country in the midst of their civil war. And Stalin doesn't really trust Hitler, but he figures that it's better to make some kind of deal with Hitler and be Hitler's ally than be his enemy at this point, because he's thinking about, the Russian people, and he's worried about them going to war. He doesn't think they're ready. And at the same time, Stalin is such a crazed man himself. They're both such, egotistical men. He convinces himself that Hitler is actually scared of him because most Russian people are, since he sends them to the gulag and kills millions. So he convinces themselves that they're on equal footing and that, if Hitler says he's his ally, they'll take over the world together. And they'll dominate Europe, and that Hitler would dare never cross him because he thinks no one would ever cross him, that he's always one step ahead. So they signed the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, saying they'll never attack each other. They'll take over part of the world together. In fact, they're going to attack Poland together. And this really kind of scared the rest of the world because fascism, which is what Hitler is, and communism are opposites. But they secretly agreed to attack on September 1st to divide, Poland into two territories. And Hitler has all of his ducks in a row and nobody knows it. And, you can see the different foreign ministers here with that's Stalin very happy, as Ribbentrop from Germany and Molotov, signed this deal. And you can see kind of how they're planning to divide up, Poland and such in the future, and how they're going to be annexing part of the land, to Germany and the other part of the land to Russia. And all these political cartoons come out with Hitler and Stalin as best buds, even husband and wife. But how long can it last? People are skeptical. They don't really, it's very scary that two such difficult, evil men would be together. And people have no idea at this point how crazed and maniacal they are, but they're still very suspicious and threatened by them in a sense because they realize that they have been doing some horrid things. By 1940, they officially create the Axis powers, where we've got Japan and Germany and Italy all together in one united group going to take over the world together, kind of cementing some of the earlier alliances that they had, like the Rome-Berlin Axis and things of that nature. Now, World War II eventually begins September 1st, 1939, when Germany invades Poland, and they're going to be coming from the west, and Russia's going to be coming from the east. Hitler refuses to fight a war like World War I. He says, no more horses, we're using tanks, our panzers, we're coming in with our Luftwaffe, our Air Force, we're going to come in first, we're going to bomb farms and factories and cities, and then we're going to roll in with fast-moving tanks and then with ground troops and maybe some men on horseback, but this is going to be very different. It's going to be a blitzkrieg, a lightning-quick attack, and Poland's army, which is still very much so machine guns, yes, but men on horseback, they won't stand a chance, even if they are prepared, and they plan their attack. And unfortunately, Poland is conquered in less than a month because of the fact that, they're just not able to, fight back in terms of their army being not as well trained, not as well prepared, and really it's all about the technology. Plus, you've got two countries surrounding you from once. I'll tell you that this is when my life forever changed because my grandfather was I think 15 when World War II began. I'm trying to remember now. And, he lied about his age. He said that he was only 13 or 14, so that as Hitler came in, and the SS came to his town, he wouldn't be forced to serve in Hitler's army. And they weren't taking them as prisoners of war at this point because he looked like a strong, strapping young man who could fight. And luckily, his family wasn't sent into prisoner of war camps either. We weren't Jewish or anything, so we were not sent to, a ghetto or a concentration camp or an extermination camp, thank goodness, or anything like that. But yeah, he was sent to a farm and he spent the entire war farming and, was taken from his family, and he didn't see his family again until 1951. And he couldn't really contact them or communicate with them. It took him a long time, I think, to even be able to write to them or send any kind of communication to them. And his sisters had to hide in the attic, hide in the barn, because if the German soldiers got you, they usually would rape you or kill you or desecrate you in some ways. It was pretty rough. There's a YouTube link at the bottom if you want to watch and learn more about the technology. But this is the very beginning of the war, and this is when Britain and France decide to declare war since Poland's neutrality has been violated. The U.S. is still going to remain neutral, saying we're not getting involved in this European conflict. Last slide. And the first real year of the war is called the Phony War, the Sitzkrieg, the Sitting War, the Boer War, because nothing's really happening while everybody's preparing for war, getting prepped. And the only thing that does happen is that Russia does go ahead and they take over Finland, Sweden, and Norway, but Germany and the Allies aren't really doing anything at this point yet. And we'll move into more battles tomorrow. That's it for now. Have a great day, guys. Later.